What would you do if your neighbor kept parking in your driveway, blocking you in, ignoring your warnings, and acting like your property was hers to use? Daniel Carter tried to be patient. He asked nicely. He left notes. He even went to the HOA. But Karen Whitmore, self-righteous, entitled, and completely unbearable, didn't care. She saw an open driveway and decided it was hers. So Daniel did what had to be done. He towed her car. Karen lost her mind. She screamed. She ranted. And when that didn't work, she threatened to call the cops, to lie and say Daniel had stolen her car. But Karen made one crucial mistake. Daniel had proof. You don't argue with a Karen. You let her destroy herself. And when the police arrived, Karen finally learned what happens when entitlement meets consequences. Daniel Carter had dealt with a lot of nonsense from his neighbor, Karen Whitmore. The passive-aggressive complaints, the absurd HOA violation notices, the way she hovered around his yard, pretending to inspect the sidewalk while really just trying to snoop. But this was something else entirely. Daniel pulled into his street, ready to turn into his driveway, only to find Karen's car parked dead center in it. Again, his grip tightened on the steering wheel. He took a slow breath, counted to 3, and parked along the curb instead. He had asked. He had warned. He had even spoken to the HOA. But Karen just didn't care. She had decided that because he only had one car, his driveway was free real estate. Daniel stepped out of his truck, jaw clenched. Karen stood by her porch, watering flowers that didn't need watering, watching him like a cat that had just knocked something off a shelf on purpose. Afternoon, Daniel, she called sweetly. Daniel exhaled sharply. Karen, move your car. Karen gasped, placing a hand over her chest like he had personally insulted her. Oh, Daniel, really? It's not a big deal. It's just sitting there, completely unused. And I had groceries to bring in. I don't care. Daniel took a step forward, keeping his voice even. It's my driveway. I need you to move your car. Karen pursed her lips, looking bored. Oh, calm down. I'll move it later. Daniel's patience was hanging by a thread. Not later, Karen. Now. Karen sighed dramatically. Daniel, you are so territorial. Why waste all this energy when it's not hurting anyone? She waved a hand. It's not like you have guests coming over. And really, don't you think you're being a bit childish? This isn't New York City. There's plenty of space for everyone. Daniel ground his teeth together. She knew what she was doing. She knew. Karen, he said slowly, forcing himself to stay calm. If your car is still in my driveway in 1 hour, I'm calling a tow truck. Karen laughed. Oh, please. You wouldn't dare. That would be so rude. Daniel didn't respond. He just turned on his heel and walked inside. Karen kept laughing. She thought he was bluffing. She thought she could get away with it. She was about to find out exactly how wrong she was. Daniel didn't waste time. Karen had ignored his requests, mocked his patience, and acted like his property was hers to use whenever she pleased. Well, not anymore. He pulled out his phone, scrolled through his contacts, and hit call. Citywide Towing, how can we help you? Yeah, Daniel said, keeping his voice steady. I need a car towed off my private property. The woman on the other end of the line didn't hesitate. Address. Daniel gave her the details, his eyes flicking toward the driveway, where Karen's precious SUV still sat right where she left it. How long has the vehicle been there? Daniel exhaled sharply. She's been doing this for weeks. I warned her today, told her she had an hour. It's been 2. The woman clicked her tongue. She's not a tenant. Nope. She lives next door. There was a pause, then a soft chuckle. Oof. One of those. Daniel smirked. Yeah. All right, sir. We'll have a truck out in 20 minutes. The tow truck arrived right on time. Daniel stood on his porch, arms crossed, watching as the driver stepped out, assessed the situation, and got to work. The guy barely needed 5 minutes to hook Karen's car up to the truck, securing it in place with smooth, practiced efficiency. And that's when the screaming started. What do you think you're doing? Karen's voice cut through the quiet evening like nails on a chalkboard. She stormed out of her house, arms flailing, her face contorted in sheer rage. Daniel didn't move. The tow truck driver barely spared her a glance. Ma'am, this vehicle is parked on private property without permission. It's not illegal. Karen screeched, practically shaking with fury. Daniel wasn't even using the driveway. He had plenty of space to park on the street. Daniel finally spoke. "That's not how property works, Karen." She whipped around, glowing with outrage. "You petty little man." She stabbed a manicured finger toward him. "I was going to move it later. You're just being a child about this." Daniel smirked. "I warned you." Karen gasped, like she had been personally wounded by his words. You vindictive little." The tow truck driver interrupted, utterly unfazed. "Ma'am, are you the vehicle owner?" Karen spun on him. "Of course I am." "Then you can pick it up from the impound lot," he said smoothly. "They'll explain the fees when you get there." Karen's entire body stiffened. "Fees?" The driver shrugged. "Standard towing and impound charges. You'll have to pay them before we release the car." Karen let out a piercing shriek, throwing her hands in the air like a cartoon villain mid-breakdown. Daniel just watched, enjoying every second. She had done this to herself, and now she was paying for it. Karen was livid. The moment the tow truck disappeared down the street, her precious SUV in tow, she marched up Daniel's driveway, her heels clicking against the pavement like an impending storm. "You have made a huge mistake," she shrieked, jabbing a furious finger toward his chest. "Do you have any idea who you're dealing with? I'm on the HOA board. I have influence. I can have you fined. I can have you." Daniel cut her off, his voice calm, even amused. "For what, Karen?" Karen faltered, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. Daniel smirked. "For having my own driveway towed? For enforcing actual property laws." He took a step closer, his voice dropping just slightly. "Or are you mad because, for once, you didn't get away with it?" Karen huffed, folding her arms tightly over her chest. "This is harassment. This is retaliation. You're targeting me." "No, Karen." Daniel's voice was firm now. "I gave you weeks of warnings. I asked you nicely. I even let the HOA handle it first." He raised a brow. "But you didn't listen." Karen's face flushed red. "This is unacceptable." Daniel just shrugged. "Then I guess you should have parked in your own driveway." Karen sputtered, rage radiating off her like a furnace about to explode. And then, suddenly, her face changed. The rage melted into something more calculated, more conniving. "Oh," she cooed, tilting her head like a predator. "You think you're so smart, don't you? But let's see how smart you feel when the police arrive." Daniel blinked. "You're calling the cops?" Karen's lips curled into a smug little smile. "Oh, yes." She folded her arms. "I'm going to tell them you stole my car, that you had it illegally removed, that I was just a poor neighbor trying to park for a few minutes, and you attacked me out of spite." Daniel stared at her. Then, slowly, he chuckled. Karen's smug look wavered. "What's so funny?" Daniel leaned against his porch railing, his smirk growing. "Go ahead." Karen blinked. Daniel gestured toward his security cameras, two of them, positioned perfectly to catch every second of their interactions. "You want to call the cops?" he said, grinning now. "Then please do, because when they show up, I'll have security footage of you admitting to parking in my driveway for weeks, ignoring warnings, ignoring the HOA, blatantly refusing to move." Karen's smile vanished. Daniel kept going. "And then I'll show them this conversation, where you just admitted that you're planning to lie to law enforcement." Karen's entire body stiffened. For the first time, she had nothing to say. Daniel folded his arms. "Go ahead, Karen." His voice was calm, steady, and dripping with satisfaction. "Call the cops." Karen's mouth twitched. Her hands curled into fists. She let out a strangled noise, half fury, half realization that she had lost, before turning on her heel and storming back toward her house. Daniel watched her go, feeling lighter than he had in weeks. This wasn't over. But Karen had just realized she wasn't in control anymore. The police arrived within the hour. Not because Karen had called them. Oh no, she had been too stunned to follow through on her bluff, but because Daniel had decided to handle this himself. If Karen thought she could twist the story in her favor, she was about to learn the hard way that the law wasn't as easy to manipulate as the HOA. Detective Ryan Morales stepped out of the patrol car, adjusting his belt with the air of a man who had seen too many ridiculous neighborhood disputes. He glanced between Daniel and Karen, then exhaled through his nose. "All right, Morales said, rubbing his temple. Let's hear it. Karen jumped at the opportunity. Officer, she gasped, her voice already melodramatic and dripping with outrage. I'm the victim of a completely unjust and illegal attack. Daniel stole my car and had it towed out of pure malice. Morales raised an eyebrow. You're saying he stole your car? Karen nodded furiously. Yes. I was only parked for a moment, and then he just snatched it away like some kind of petty tyrant. Daniel, standing calmly on his porch, let out a quiet chuckle. Morales turned to him. Mr. Carter? Daniel crossed his arms. Security footage. Karen visibly froze. Daniel gestured toward his front door, where the camera's red recording light blinked steadily. Every conversation we've had. Every time she parked in my driveway. Every warning I gave. The HOA complaints. The note I left on her car last week. And, of course, he smirked, her admitting she planned to lie to the police. Karen's face drained of color. Morales let out a slow, deeply exhausted sigh. Is that true, ma'am? Karen sputtered. He's twisting my words. I didn't. Daniel pulled out his phone, tapped the screen, and suddenly, her voice filled the air. You think you're so smart, don't you? Let's see how smart you feel when the police arrive. I'm going to tell them you stole my car. That I was just a poor neighbor trying to park for a few minutes. That you attacked me out of spite. Morales' expression flattened. Karen went silent. A stiff, choking noise escaped her throat as she realized, completely, devastatingly realized, that she was done. Morales let out another long-suffering sigh and pulled out his notepad. Ma'am, filing a false police report is a crime. He flipped the page. And trespassing on private property, which, by the way, we now have clear video evidence of, is also a crime. Karen gasped, offended beyond belief. I was just using available space. Morales didn't react. And you refused to move after multiple warnings? Karen's jaw clenched. Morales snapped his notepad shut. All right, ma'am. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to receive a trespassing citation, a disturbing the peace fine, and a formal warning that if you continue this behavior, the next time we get called out here, you'll be facing actual charges. Karen choked on air. Daniel smirked. Morales turned back to him. Mr. Carter, you're well within your rights to file a no trespassing order. Given this history, I'd recommend it. Daniel nodded. Already planned on it. Karen looked like she was about to combust. You can't do this to me. You're treating me like some kind of criminal. Morales stared at her blankly. Ma'am, you are a criminal. And with that, he handed her a fat stack of fines and walked back to his patrol car. Karen just stood there, her entire body shaking, as she stared down at the papers in horror. Daniel, still grinning, leaned in just enough to whisper, Told you. Karen let out a strangled noise of pure, seething rage. But this time, she had nothing left to say. Daniel stood on his porch, sipping his coffee, watching Karen seethe as she stormed back to her house, gripping the citations like they had personally offended her entire existence. It was over. Her precious car had cost her hundreds in impound fees. The trespassing fines had added even more damage to her wallet. And now she knew she couldn't touch his driveway again. And the best part? The entire neighborhood had witnessed her downfall. As she stomped inside, slamming the door so hard the windows shook, Daniel could already hear the whispers spreading. He leaned against his porch railing, exhaling in satisfaction. For the first time in months, his driveway was clear. His property was his again. And Karen? Karen had finally learned that actions have consequences. Daniel smirked, lifting his coffee cup in a mock toast to her house. Stay mad, Karen. And with that, he went back inside at peace at last.